hi, I don't have a catchphrase, so Deltarune's a lot like sleep deprivation. They both drive you crazy, and they're both just god-awful for your mental health. But sometimes they can both be really worth it. So whenever you and I started talking about a month or so ago, I decided, you know what, nah, some things are off limits, and some things I just don't have very many original things to say about. Now, that's not to say I didn't have anything to say about Deltarune or its divorced step prequel-in-law. God freaking no. I could gush about these games for ages, but that's just sort of the thing with these titles. They're so small, and they mean so much to so many people that it's kinda just what people do. They scour these games to their depths for every single little minute detail they have lingering in the darkness, so it's like, what could I even possibly bring to the table here? Well, okay, sure, I could just talk about my personal experience with these games maybe? Nah, not really. Everyone's already done that to death. These games touch people in such an interesting way that I don't think anything I could add to that discussion would be anything all that new. Like, I genuinely think that everything there is to possibly say about these two games has been said probably more than a few hundred times by now. But screw it, I guess, because I had an idea for a way I could take this convo in a somewhat new direction. Kinda, not really. It combines all the stuff I just mentioned, plus my lack of sleep's been so intense lately, and Deltarune's quite literally the only thing I can muster the brainpower to even think about. So I'm just rolling with it. Undertale was this once-in-a-lifetime magical experience. Of course it was. It told a distinct, complex, yet heartfelt meta-narrative story about the mechanics of gaming in such a sincere and cohesive way that I don't think any game will, or honestly ever should, do again. Because, I mean, this game already handled that perfectly. Why even try? I mean, I love meta-narratives, and people should absolutely keep telling them, but, like, not in that exact same way, you know? I think the best impact Undertale left was this undeniable flurry of pure creativity it unleashed upon the world. I mean, this game inspired so many people to become artists in their own right. Like, so many started drawing, composing music, streaming, making their own games, and so on, just because of the impact this game had on them, and it was a truly beautiful thing to see. Like, I'm not even sure there is another franchise, much less any single game on the face of the planet that's received as many fan works or alternate universe takes as this one did. But over time, Undertale sort of garnered this reputation of being, you know, the gold standard of indie games, mostly because, well, it is that, undisputedly. If you gotta point at one that's the best, one that changed the world the most, the one that all others strive to be, it near single-handedly is that one. But with that title, with that position, came this sort of desperation, this deep hunger from this new wave of indie devs influenced by this game to try, not to forge for themselves their own legacy, to build for themselves their own grand world of their own design, their own creation, but to attach themselves in some way, shape, or form to Undertale. To remind potential players, hey, you liked Undertale, right? Want to play it again, but like, not as good? And on the surface, I never got that. I always figured, yeah, Undertale was this untouchable masterpiece, and indie devs should absolutely take inspiration from it, of course. Everyone should take note of all the brilliant things that makes it work the way it does, but do you have to mention, hey, my game's inspired by Undertale in your own advertising? Do you really have to try and do the exact same things that game did first? Do you have to try to use the same story concepts, the same tropes, the same visual style? Because no matter what happens, no matter where it goes, even if your game makes it and makes it big, it's always going to remain overlooked in Undertale's shadow, and that goes for any work of art riding the coattails of something else, or at least that's what I used to think. Deltarune's first chapter came out a good 3 years after Undertale already took the world over by storm, and it presented itself as not quite a sequel and not really a prequel either, but an alternative take on this world and these characters, not much unlike a lot of the fan-made AUs the mid-late 2010s were fraught with. Now, this was my introduction to the franchise, the main reason for that being it was free, and I was like 13. 13-year-old me was an interesting little chap, and by that I mean like not at all. The only thing really interesting about that piece of shit was just how goddamn uninteresting he was. I think I might have mentioned this when you visited a few weeks ago, but 2017 to 2019-ish is the only era of my life I feel any sort of nostalgia or warmth towards. And it's not because these were necessarily good years for me, because, well, they weren't, but they were the years that I finally started to grow into my own, so to speak. The years I finally got something I had spent the rest of my empty, soulless life not feeling like I truly had. The years I finally had found something worth living for. See, I had known up to this point that I wanted to make games, but it wasn't something I'd ever really considered an actual possibility. It was just a childish dream straggling around in the back of my mind, not unlike an NFL fan wanting to make it as an all-star player, or a comic book nerd wanting superpowers, or even this little fucker wanting a WWE title. I didn't really have, anything going on in life, so I spent most of my time online, which, like, does that really surprise you? And my personal favorite game is Super Paper Mario, which is weird, I know, I've got my reasons. And I started seeing a lot of people comparing the antagonist of that game to this newfangled Jevil guy from Deltarune, so when I checked it out, I noticed, hey, this game looks a lot like those Mario and Luigi RPGs from my childhood. I adore those games, and this is free. I should actually try it out and do something new for once. No harm in trying, right? And I have not recovered since. This is the game that sort of made me realize, oh hey, it really is possible for just a handful of people on their own to make something great, to make a difference, and I owe it pretty much everything for that. I still look back at Chapter 1 to try to figure out what exactly it was about it that made it appeal to me so much, and I think I know how to put it into words now. Despite the similarities to those Mario and Luigi RPGs, or any of the other dozens of works that influenced Deltarune, I had never played a game anything like this before, and it just nailed a lot of what I love to see in a game. Kick-ass retro-feeling art style and premise, in-depth and charming characters, incredible music, intriguing, engrossing lore, and I think most of all, one hell of a heavenly atmosphere. Man, the tone and ambience of Chapter 1 just can't be beat. A lot of that has to do with the game's limited visuals and mechanics, I think, and a lot of that still has to do with the god-tier music and writing, along with the way it uses a lot of Undertale's characters and tropes, but twists and tweaks them up just enough to make something totally new out of them, and just all the vague mystery it sets up. It was, I don't know, it was special. Not to mention, I just really like the battle system here. It's like if Undertale and Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga had a really cool baby, but the best part to me is the tension point system. Like, the game actively rewards you for getting closer to bullets while just avoiding them, which is just a great risk versus reward mechanic. All in all, I'm honestly sort of glad I had to wait so long to get more of this game, because sitting on it for such a long time and letting the feels and the speculation all marinate made everything so much more fun and added so much to the ambiguity of this world. I really can't imagine what it's going to be like for new fans in the future who can play the entirety of this game within like a week. Is that jealousy? I mean, maybe a little, but I kind of do feel like the ride, the wait, the anticipation for what's next is a huge communal part of the experience of being a fan of this game. I mean, that's something even referenced in-game a few times. I don't know. But something I always found very interesting about this game was just how apparent it was with its influences, with what it took inspiration from. And that's something people like to rib the game on, and how supposedly unoriginal the story, or at least the plot was. Which at face value, sure. Deltarune sees two kids end up in an alternate world, smack dab in the middle of a prophecy of light and dark. One of the kids is the weird emo outcast loner, the other's the mean one who becomes less mean trademark by the end of the story, both guided by this mysterious sage who may or may not be hiding things from them and from us. Wow, groundbreaking stuff, right? But I always felt like saying that was so downright disingenuous. Like, yeah, the plot structure's been used before. Hell, pieces of it is almost identical to Undertale's when you look at it at its barest. But that's only when you suck every bit of originality and charm and character away from what makes Deltarune what it is.
You see, there's this thing people love to do to make a work of art look bad, and that's dumbing it down, tweaking it to just a mere outline of what it actually is, to say, oh wow, look, it's just like this other thing. You can take pretty much anything, any movie, any game, any show, someone's done it before, and Deltarune is a great example of that.
I mean, it's always been linked really closely to Amori, and for obvious reasons. They both started production at around the same time and are both pixelated indie RPGs heavily inspired by Earthbound and a few other games. Hell, each game's creators contributed music and artwork respectively to each other's games, which is honestly pretty cool. And considering both games' weird-ass release formats, they've sorta always been compared to each other. A lot of the characters seem pretty similar, the premise of each game seems pretty similar, hell, even the stories as a whole seem pretty similar, but saying that just doesn't work because there's no real merit to doing that. To tearing apart any story and saying it's essentially the same as another, or all stories because of the supposed bullshit monomyth. Because these games are just so obviously incredibly different, just like most works that just so happen to share some tropes. Even if that was an intentional thing. That's part of the magic of Deltarune I think I found myself really attracted too. I mean, it and Undertale both took tropes and ideas from stories done many, many times over, but were both able to build something new and beautiful from those ashes, just like all great stories do, but with a much deeper narrative voice, with this seemingly inherent knowledge and confidence that this is something really great. There's not a hint of doubt, an ounce of insecurity in any aspect of these games, and that's something more stories could really use. And that's what Deltarune's really all about at its deepest. See, Chapter 1's Dark World revolved around playing cards and toys and board games and other similar playthings. It was clear that at the very least, some meta-narrative about escapism was being established, a story was being told about art, about what its purpose is, how it imitates and mirrors life. There truly is value to imagination and what the extent of that can look like. And I don't think any character encapsulates that idea better than Susie does, with an S. Each of these chapters sort of seem to latch on to one main character and explore it, link their personas at their core. What makes them tick, what makes them who they are, and what can make them better at handling their problems, better at just being people, what have you. And despite the fact that this one, Chris, is seemingly at least the game's main protag, Chapter 1 unequivocally belongs to Susie. She's introduced to us as, well, that character. She's rough, she's crass, she's a bit of an ass, and everyone's afraid of her because, well, she's scary as shit. And she's mirrored in the Dark World by this absolute goof, by Lancer, the evil Chaos King's son, who's about as scary as a bag of marshmallow gummy worms. And these two knucklechucks get along, like, way too well. And it's funny, because Susie tries, like, way too hard to be this cold, tough-as-nails creature, and that's juxtaposed by this absolute buffoon, who, over time, you sort of see Susie kind of start acting like. And it's not because his personality rubs off on her or anything, no. It's because this is who she really is. This uncaring, mean-spirited identity is nothing more than a mere act, a front. A mask she puts on as a defense mechanism from everyone else due, in part, to her inability to fit in, from the lack of acceptance around her. Lancer's relationship, or, well, lack thereof, with his dear old dad, I've always interpreted as a mirror to Susie's relationship, or lack thereof, with her own parental figures, whoever that may be. But through Lancer, through this world, through her interactions and growing bonds with Chris and Rouse even, she doesn't change per se, she just allows herself to be who she actually is. And maybe it's just my own personal experience or whatever, but I find that when people allow you to be who you really are, when they accept you, you end up liking those people more. And that's what the Dark World, that's what Chris and Rouse and Lancer provide Susie with, a chance to be real, a chance to be genuine, a chance to build connections, and that's the true reason for her change here, all culminating with her, in the end, quite literally standing up to the very personification of her facade and the Chaos King, and it's not a total 180 either. She's still crude, she's still a punk, but you get to see her as her more honest self. It's really great because the game keeps bringing up how kind, how hopeful and optimistic and confident Susie is and grows to be, but they don't go and turn her into this gentle, hyper-feminine character or anything. No, she stays true to herself, and that's important. That's one of the best things about this game's release structure to me. The fact that over the years, we sort of get to see Susie grow as we grow with her in a way. We got to see a good bit of that in Chapter 2 a few years later, which has always been considered the better of the two chapters, and is it? I mean, yeah, but like, maybe it is just because of the impact it had, but I do still kinda prefer Chapter 1. Like, it changes every day, but I just prefer that chapter's tone and soundtrack, and sometimes the simpler story appeals to me more. But oh my god, compared to Chapter 1, Chapter 2 is a massive upgrade. It's undoubtedly better visually, it has much better gameplay and mechanics. Its soundtrack rivals the first, hell, it even tops it in a lot of ways. The battle system is better. Honestly, the amount of improvement here is utterly baffling, and on its own, I think it's far and away the funniest goddamn game I've ever played in my life, and even comparing that to the rest of Deltarune, that's saying a lot. Queen is a much better antagonist than King ever was. That's not to say he was bad or anything, nah. He did great in his role of reflecting Susie's brutish nature, and his motivations, his goals, super solid. But Queen is a lot more complex. Instead of wanting revenge against the Lightners for abandoning the Dark World, she, like Darkners are supposed to, just wants to make the Lightners' lives better. She wants to entertain them, to give them purpose, and what's the best way to achieve that goal? By becoming a fascist dictator, of course. She's also kind of like a metaphor for the internet and stuff, and she represents Noelle's domineering mother, and Birdley, and maybe Toriel, I don't know, the jury's still out there, and she's a comic riot, and unlike King, she's actually a dominating force in the story, while he only got one scene at the very end. Lordy G heaven, she has got a lot going on. The meta-narrative from the first chapter chapter goes even deeper here, this time centering around escapism through computers and tech and junk, but it's a lot more obvious, with this dark world revolving more so around Noelle and her struggle to be more assertive and independent, both from her mother and from this sack of chicken shit. Getting to see her and Chris reconnect after all these years and recoil from the implied tragedy of whatever the hell happened to Noelle's sister is a great development too, even if something does feel sorta off. Over the course of the past 2 days, it's becoming increasingly more noticeable to the people around them that Chris isn't Chris, or at least not in the usual sense. They say things they wouldn't normally say, they do things they don't normally do. And as the Chapter 1 ending sorta confirmed, that's because of us, because of our influence, because of our control over them. This isn't like a lot of RPGs where the protagonist is more or less a player insert. No, Chris is their own autonomous person with their own feelings, their own likes and dislikes, their own experiences that we've almost completely overwritten, that we've taken away. And unlike a certain Nico one-shot who takes that shit in stride, Chris doesn't really like being controlled by us, by the player. But that makes you wonder, just how far can your control over Chris go? The game gives you an inch, is there any way to take a mile from that? That was something Undertale was so well known for, the control you had. There were multiple different endings you could reach based solely on what actions you chose to take, but this game set up that no, there's only one ending and your choices, no matter what you do, don't matter. You can't even kill enemies here. And that's something Chapter 2 handled brilliantly in its notorious weird route, a sort of spiritual successor to Undertale's No Mercy route, which saw you track down and murder every single enemy in the game. See, there was just this certain magic to No Mercy, as weird as that feels to say. Maybe not magic, maybe the atmosphere, maybe feel, but the game virtually threw everything at you that it could, so for the love of God, maybe you would stop playing, maybe you would give up, maybe you would delete your file, or at the very least turn back and reset and play the funny little innocent game Undertale is supposed to be. It tries to scare you into quitting, it tries to guilt you for what you've done, it tries to frustrate you with this behemoth of a battle, it tries to bore you to death, it tries to disappoint you, it even throws this effing guy at you as a last resort, but no matter what, you keep going because you have to know what happens, because you have to do it all, to take it all, and it's a real masterpiece, except it's also like a real bitch in the ass to play. Like you've got to grind endlessly through this world, now rendered empty and boring and lifeless, to find and kill everyone, and it's a real chore. But hey, that was the whole point. It's not supposed to be fun to play through this route because of your actions, because of what you've done. All the charm of Undertale has died, and it does a phenomenal job at making you feel like just an absolute scumbag for killing the underground. It's a hauntingly amazing artistic experience, all about exploring the grind set mentality in gaming, and I didn't think there'd ever be any way to follow up with that. And then Deltarune went and said, "You think that's something? Look at this." God. The weird route is in every way a worthy successor because it just feels so wrong. Like, yeah, the No Mercy route made you feel bad, but it still felt like an intended part of the game. But the weird route, that felt like something you flat out were not supposed to do. A boundary you were breaking through, a bug in the system, a crack in the surface of this artificial world, and maybe that's because this was a totally hidden feature, but I think the very nature of what you're doing is what makes it feel that way. You've already taken Chris's autonomy, they're essentially your slave now, no matter what you do. But they can still emote and express themselves to some extent. But the weird route is about throwing all of that completely in the dumpster and using Chris and their bond with Noelle to remove her autonomy as well, to transform her into this numb, empty killing machine, since she's the only person in this world who actually can kill enemies due to her ice power stuff. It's genuinely horrifying to see this pure, innocent person slowly becoming addicted to the newfound allure of getting stronger through violence, to see her stop questioning these terrible demands she's given, to see her ignore her very conscience by suppressing the awful memories of what she's done, of what she's doing, and to see her traumatized in the light world, holding on to any scrap of evidence that could let her believe it was all just a dream, a fleeting nightmare. Like, damn, man. But what's even more interesting is how the world reacts to your actions, and I don't just mean the other characters, I mean the very soul of Deltarune itself. When embarking the No Mercy route, Undertale, like I said, basically did everything it could possibly think of to make it stop. But it's different this time. No, this game knows now it's all hopeless. There's no point in even trying, and it just tries to get the game over with as soon as possible. All the bright, happy stuff is kinda just skipped over now. There's not even a real final boss anymore, so the game just shrugs its shoulders and throws Spamton Neo at you. Oh yeah, he exists too. That's why aside from all his hilarious quirks and deep lore and awesome theme songs, I think Spamton really made it big. Because if I've said it once, I've said it a dozen times. Cohesion is what really makes a game something special, and Spamton embodied exactly what Chris wants most. And that's the pursuit of freedom from the very entity pulling their strings, namely us. Man, these games know how to make us feel kinda shitty for playing them, but to be fair, it's not like we want to be here either. We were promised our own form, our own blank avatar to fill the shoes in. We just ended up in this one for one reason or another. Like, from that lens, we're in the same boat as Chris is, really. But enacting the weird route, yeah, that's all on us, and I don't blame Chris for absolutely despising us for that. Hell, I despise us for that. Either way, Chapter 2 was great. I love all the wacky hijinks and moments of sheer dread and tenderness found in its main route. And, I mean, the weird route speaks for itself. Like, come on, I just spent give or take 1,000 words rambling about it, but whatever. It took a few more years to get Chapters 3 and 4, and in that time, I think Deltarune has reached this sort of legendary status, and it feels so right to see this game get all the attention and love it deserves, with even Nintendo flaunting it as a big-time Switch 2 launch title. Chapter 3, oh man, I hate to use the U word. It's not my thing. It's not my style, especially when it comes to uber-popular indie games like this, but I do think it's underrated. That's not to say people dislike it or anything. Not really. In fact, I've seen a lot of praise specifically towards Tenna. People have had just a ton of fun with all the obvious fan animations and whatnot they could do here.
Something a burglar would not want to see when he breaks into a house. Right.
Naked grandma!
Naked, huh?
But a lot of fans didn't care much for the soundtrack. They were disappointed by the secret boss. They wished Toriel played a larger part in the story. They were upset all their fan theories about the different things in Chris's house coming to life didn't come true, and I think it was ultimately a little overlooked due to just how incredible Chapter 4 was. And I'll be honest, I disagree with literally all of that. Well, except for Chapter 4 being better, but that's not really the point. Shut up. Before release, the creative force behind this game had said Chapter 3 was a lot lighter in terms of story, which I kinda don't think is the case. I mean, in terms of plot and lore, like, yeah, sure, I guess, but in the same way Chapter 1 was truly Susie's chapter and Chapter 2 was Noelle's, Chapter 3 is where Chris really gets to take the center stage for themselves after all this build-up, and it's amazing. Maybe it's the Amori fan in me, but I absolutely love psychological exploration in games, and even after everything the first 2 chapters set up, this is where you get to see more of who Chris really is than ever before. And it makes sense as to why. I mean, the antagonist here is Tenna, Chris's literal TV, who sort of feels responsible for raising Chris, for providing them with a lot of their best childhood memories, who shares a lot of the same traumas Chris does, primarily their whole, family and social circle falling apart thing. Chris's parents' divorce was so bad it effectively gave their television separation anxiety, and I don't know how to feel about that. I mean, Queen was incredible, and King was great too, but I honestly think Tenna's my favorite chapter and tag so far. Maybe that's just recency bias, I don't know. But their fear of abandonment, their fear of technology better than them, their fear of getting old and stale, their fear of never getting to entertain people again and seeing their world completely fall apart around them because of that, I love that stuff. And I weirdly find it really relatable, though I will say I think that says more about me than it does Tenna, for sure. But I think it deepens this game's theme so well by adding some contrasting perspectives to it. Like Rouse tells Tenna, yeah, well, Darkner's purpose is to make Lightners happy for a little while before they're discarded and forgotten. But Susie interjects, nah, there's more to Darkners, more to art than just being enjoyed temporarily than being thrown away. And it's a great showcase of this game's whole meta-narrative and this idea of the purpose of Darkners, the purpose of entertainment and escapism as a whole. And I really think all the new characters are great too, like especially these 2 Jokers that single-handedly prove, like with any of life's problems, divorce is always the answer. And then of course the whole polyamory angle is great too, but I don't think I even have to say that. I mean, anything involving Roll's card is automatically gold. And like I said, Deltarune consistently wears its influences on its sleeves, referencing, say, Punch-Out! And Smash Bros. And Mario World and so many other games at different points. But Chapter 3, with its game show nature, takes that even further with homages to Link's Awakening and WarioWare and Brandish and so on and so on. And not only does that perfectly encapsulate the themes of entertainment at play here, but it shows how all of these old games, these old works of art, these old stories, pave the way for the new, can be retooled into being something innovative and timeless. I really love the secret boss quest here too. Like, I'll admit, when I first laid eyes on Ram in the S-rank room, I let out a huge groan. I saw his creepy design, I heard that familiar Spamton motif, he was talking about freedom and big shots. I was honestly a little worried he was just going to be a diet Spamton at first, but no. This whole angle is amazing. It's a great peek into the inner workings of Chris's mind, as it perfectly shows their hunger for freedom that contrasts with the fact that they seemingly like and hate liking the fact that they can wash their hands of any of the things we make them do, while still getting to reap the benefits of those things. And this boss, Irem, who I genuinely do think is being controlled by Ram, there's just way too much evidence for it. It perfectly reflects that. But if you want to be like really technical, Ram, Irem, whoever, isn't the secret boss because, well, you don't get a shadow crystal for beating them. No, they're just the key for unlocking the long-awaited Shadow Mantle, which gives the average player the endurance to survive against the chapter's final boss you're almost destined to lose to, the fucking Knight? The Roaring Knight, this shadowy figure that's been set up since day one as the real force driving everything, pulling the strings of all the foes you face, though maybe not literally, finally comes face to face with us. I mean, structurally speaking, the halfway point was the perfect time for the Knight to finally show its face, which, like, yeah, by this point, it's painfully obvious that the Knight is Death. Like, I don't even think I have to say that. But I don't think it's really supposed to be a surprise either. Though I do think it'd be really funny if we got a huge bait and switch and it turned out to be just, like, Asriel or something. Would that be less compelling? I mean, with what we know now, it probably, yeah. But again, consider this. It'd be funny. The Knight's reveal and subsequent boss fight, and honestly that whole ending of Chapter 3 is incredible. In my point of view, it's easily the best chapter ending yet, which again, is saying a lot. And being among the first to witness it was honestly sorta incredible. That is my story, and goddammit, I'm sticking to it.
See, I work stinking dead-end retail jobs, specifically night shift, and let me let you in on a little secret, my friend. I fucking hate night shift. Like, I also hate my stinking dead-end retail job, but that's not exactly the point. To sort of reclaim time for myself, I generally sleep about 3 to 5 hours a day during the day, so that way I can have time after work to procrastinate working on my game, and let me tell you, it fucking sucks. But do you really think I slept the day this came out? The very thing I'd been living for the past 7 years? Nah, man, the very second I was able to, June 4th at 10 a.m. sharp, I was all over this thing, but because I needed to sleep so I wouldn't be absolute trash at my shift just a couple of hours later, I decided to get through it really fast and let the more nitty-gritty stuff marinate for a second and third and fourth playthrough. And though I didn't get to play Chapter 4 until about a day later, I was still able to finish Chapter 3 just in time to get a couple of hours of sleep and still be absolute trash at work, because I mean, obviously I couldn't sleep after this. But as soon as I finished Chapter 3, I did the inevitable, I went on Twitter to see what people were saying about it in spoilery discussions, but I was kinda stunned to see that nobody, and I mean fucking nobody, was talking about the ending. Sorting by latest, seemingly no one had gotten there yet and didn't get there for another 20 minutes or so, which I just think is really funny.
No, obviously, I'm not saying I'm the first player to beat Chapter 3, like, of course not. The statistics of that are so exponentially low, I don't think they're even worth acknowledging. Most normal people don't even have Twitter anymore, so what am I even talking about? Like, yeah, no, not the first, not at all. The odds are absolutely not in my favor, but they're not exactly zero now, are they? No, but in all seriousness, I just mean getting to experience this in real time was borderline magical. That's why I'm so curious how the legacy of Deltarune will hold up for future generations, for people who won't have to wait so long to play through each chapter, those fucking lucky bastards. Chapter 4 is the best chapter so far. Like, I don't think it's even worth arguing against. Even as much love and appreciation I have for the other chapters, even as much as I owe to Chapter 1 and 2, I can't be unbiased here. Good God. literally. I kinda consider this to be the magnum opus of all things annoying dog, and it's like, yeah, how could I not? The gameplay has never been this engaging or dynamic. The stakes have never been this high. The tone of the story has never been so dire yet so heartfelt. And beyond that, it just looks and sounds amazing. The ending of Chapter 3 leading into this sort of establishes, alright, we're halfway through, this is the game's turning point. This isn't just a fun, lighthearted adventure with friends anymore. There are real, serious stakes at play. People's lives, the futures of both worlds as a whole, are endangered, and things begin to take on more of a dark, heavy feel, and that tonal shift is perfectly captured by the little things like, from now on, replacing Rude Buster as the default battle theme, which, as much as I adored Rude Buster, it had to happen. From now on still possesses the fun spirit of Deltarune, but now feels a lot more weighty and dramatic, which fits perfectly with the new tone the game's taken on. Like, there was this general sense of unease playing through this. It felt like this silly little world these guys went to have fun now has this dark, worrisome undercurrent infecting it. I could probably spend hours just talking about the music. Man, which, like, yeah, Tree Found in Forest, these games have incredible music, I know. But I genuinely think this chapter's soundtrack breaks the very laws of physics just to exist. It's bat-nut insane. Not only does it capture each story beat perfectly, but it captures the treacherous tone of this chapter. The music consistently brings up old ideas from past chapters and even Undertale, then completely subverts them into bearing a new meaning, which is really what this chapter is all about. Now, I could be wrong, but I feel like it's definitely the longest chapter. Like, there's easily a solid hour or so of content before the main plot even starts. You got that hilarious fake Mike boss fight, all the other new additions to Castletown, and a lot of great stuff in Hometown too. The church stuff, iconic. If churches in real life sold sick-ass fruit juice, I might actually go back. The diner scene, the black screen with some text over it, is randomly really touching. Can't miss it. And then there's the cool-ass lesbian stuff as to be expected. I really love this whole sequence. And not only do you get a ton of insight and chemistry with Noelle and Susie, and a little bit of insight regarding Des, who canonically smoked the weed with Asriel. Well, like, more importantly, the Chris stuff. Somehow, this is all funny, scary, sad, and compelling at the same time. Like, Chris tries to beat the shit out of you with a hockey stick while you listen to the gays gossip about how good Chris is at flirting. It's just so good. And I want to throw in here, I don't think enough people are mentioning how great the gag/potential legitimate story beat is that Susie constantly says things regarding Chris that are supposed to be totally platonic and innocent, but Noelle misinterprets that, leading to just way overcompensation. It's hilarious, but I also get this nagging feeling it's not gonna be too funny much longer. I don't know. But as funny as that all is, this segment is also really depressing. The first thing Chris does as soon as they free themselves from our control for just a small handful of minutes is they don't go straight to enacting their secret plan demanded of them by whoever's calling them on the phone. No, instead they make some chocolate milk, maybe, and play the piano, things they clearly really care about, but aren't able to do anymore because of us. We've always heard so much about how skilled Chris is at piano, how much they've always loved it, but unwillingly we've taken that away from them. And seeing how that's paid off later on, seeing Chris, still possessed by us, finally take control and play in order to progress, seeing Susie and Rouse egg on Chris to keep playing, it's just, Chapter 3 and 4 more than anything else give Chris so much more character and expression than they already overwhelmingly had, and the fact that some people still misconstrue them for being a simple player insert, usually just so they can misgender them, is nothing short of absolutely ridiculous to me. And that's one of the reasons I think this chapter is so great. Each of the three main characters honestly get a fair share of the spotlight here, more than before at least. Like Chris, obviously there's the stuff I said earlier, and then there's Rouse, who arguably might actually be the star standout of this chapter if there just has to be one. I mean, very arguably, but still arguably. It's so odd because, I always liked Rouse okay, but he sort of felt kind of gimmicky to me. He was just the zesty, cutesy one, I guess, and that was about it. His biggest thing seemed to be whatever secret he was hiding, the question of if he was secretly evil or not, which I'm so glad that's not the path these new chapters went down. Chapter 2 set up this idea of Rouse to some extent, beginning to explore himself a little. He gets distracted in his role as a butler, funnily enough. Then eventually he asks Chris at one point, what does it even mean to be Rouse? Who is that? And Chapter 3 continues that super well. Like, it practically cold opens with him confessing what we already sort of knew, and that's that, yeah, he can't go into the light world. His purpose is to serve the Lightners, and he doesn't really have much beyond that. He isn't real in the same way someone like Susie or someone like Chris or Noelle is. or Birdly. I don't know why I'm being specific about him, but I am. But throughout the chapter, Rouse really starts enjoying things for himself. He gets lost playing RPGs where he sorta starts off just following Chris around, but with Susie's influence, who has been defying the player's will since chapter 1, he's eventually placed in the role of the player, making the decisions himself, doing things, having fun himself. He starts forming his own opinions, and in chapter 4 he eventually ends up actually trying his own cooking since he's never done anything for himself before. Everything he ever did was for the Lightners, and he still keeps that up. He still tries to keep Susie from discovering this apparently horrible truth about the prophecy, which is that they all die at the end. Like, come on, there's no other real answer, let's be serious. He still tries to make the Dark Worlds this fun escape for her and Chris, but sort of fails because of how serious and grim and filled with tension everything's become. He still has this anxiety of not knowing how or when to put the knowledge he's been cursed with to good use. But even then, now he's beginning to see himself as an actual real person, and I think the most interesting part of that is how the other characters contribute to that growth. Again, that's something really great I think chapter 4 specializes in. Like, in the previous chapters, the characters will all have lots of internal things going on, but most of the time those things don't really intertwine with each other. Chris's struggle for autonomy is separate from Susie becoming more comfortable being herself. Rousey's growing desire to be his own guy is separate from Noelle's inability to stand up for herself. But here, you truly get to see most of those things come together. You get to see the three main protags help each other out with their own individual stuff. Susie and Chris both encourage Rousey to pursue their own personhood, even if you command Chris not to, which is such a cool moment for like 7 different reasons and sorta single-handedly kills off that stupid-ass Chris secretly hates Rousey theory. Rousey and Chris both help Susie fully accept her role in this prophecy as this super hopeful figure, and Rousey and Susie both support Chris in playing the piano again, and most importantly in literally taking bullets for them when they're expected to take the bulk of the damage. Like, oh my god, what a great sequence. These 3 jokers make me so mentally unwell. Like, it's kind of a generic trope, but I don't give a shit. The story is so good, it doesn't matter. All stories use tropes. Tropes are stories. That's what gives them life. And this trope, the whole friendship is cool, whatever thing, is done so well in spite of all that's happened during these last 2 chapters. And it's so awesome. Like, the final boss here is so epic and feels so well built up to, considering how well the Titans and the Roaring have been set up. Like, I can't think of a better place to leave off until next time than this. But I think this chapter really establishes Susie as the main character of the story, which was already sort of clear, but never quite to this level. And you know how? Well, the thematic elements are stronger than ever here. I think a lot of people, myself included, thought this chapter would focus on religion and how it's used as a form of escapism, which, I mean, it sort of kinda did. It takes place in a church and explores the history and lore of this prophecy, of this religion, more in depth than anything else before, after all, but the chapter really highlights the core of Deltarune's meta-narrative about stories in the same way it focuses on each of the 3 characters, which, given it's the point where everything kinda changes, I think was the best possible direction to go into. I did see a lot of people rejoice that the story didn't go in a whole religion bad direction, which, sure, I guess would have been more generic, but like, I wouldn't have minded it because, yeah, religion bad. I'm sorry. I mean this with all the sincerity I can possibly muster. I have nothing against religious people who aren't complete assholes, and I'm so super glad you got to be brainwashed in a church as a kid not comprised solely of comically evil, insane weirdos who would push the kill all F slurs button if they got the chance to, but that's definitively not the case for like the grand majority of everyone, let's be real. But instead of going the generic route, this series continues to be the change it clearly wants to see, and that's a problem I have with a lot of modern storytelling. Hell, not even modern storytelling. Like, look at Star Wars, for example. Now, I love Star Wars, but like, alright, we're given a world dominated by this imperialist regime, which really sucks, and it ends with that regime being overthrown, which is really cool, except we don't truly know what this rebellion is actually fighting for. Like, how are they going to take the shattered remnants of this galaxy and turn it into a better place? We don't know, and they never bother telling us. They want to restore the Republic, I guess, which might have been nice if the prequels didn't show us that, yeah, actually the Republic was totally corrupt and not much better than the Empire, really. Honestly, the New Republic falling apart in the sequels kind of makes sense when you think of it that way, and it would have been a good narrative choice if, well, the sequels didn't make the exact same narrative choice of not really showing us a better potential future. At this point, the only possible reality for the Star Wars universe is bad guys take over galaxy, good guys defeat bad guys immediately come back and take over again, repeat. But Undertale prided itself on not doing that. We're shown an underworld of monsters betrayed, cast here and trapped by humanity suffocating under this small little mountain. If there's an excuse to paint a society of dark, bleak hopelessness, it's here, but no. Instead, we're shown genuine hope for a better future, for a society of peace between the two races, which was really refreshing.
And that's exactly what Deltarune does with this church. We see a religion based on an actual reality whose whole point pretty much boils down to just be nice to people, that offers sick-ass fruit juice. It's a strong, caring community, and this is essentially what religion should be if it has to exist at all. And I think painting a picture, a beautiful illustration of what could be, what ideally should be, is much more important and much more relevant and compelling than painting one of what's already is in a grim and just gray way.
Whatever, that's all well and good, but please God, let me talk about Gerson Boom. I would die for this freaking turtle. He's essentially this game's Yoda, and his sage wisdom disguised by common old man tomfoolery sorta drives these characters through Chapter 4's daunting challenges. And it's like, considering who this character is and what he's done, both here and in Undertale, it just makes way too much sense. That brings me back to Susie, who's just the best character. It's a lot like this game mechanically, comparing her to her portrayal in Chapter 1, just like comparing Chapter 4 to Chapter 1 in terms of visuals, of gameplay, of storytelling. It is insane to see how far things have come, while still feeling the same. The second Sanctuary bit is a great showcase of that. At one point, Susie makes her own dark world, and it's one of the coolest parts in the whole game, because it stems from Susie's mind, and because each dark world is different, it's essentially the first Sanctuary, the first dark world from this chapter, but viewed from a different angle. Different colors, different physics, different puzzle mechanics, different enemies, and a background song perfectly capturing her undying yet naive and rugged hope. Honestly, this might as well just be Susie's theme at this point. It's magical stuff. She finally gets a positive role model in the form of Gerson, who, despite being dead in the light world, is represented via piles of his own dust in the dark world or something. And it is somehow some of the best storytelling in all of Deltarune. Gerson's the guy who wrote this hugely influential Lord of the Hammer novel series based on the religious prophecy of Deltarune, and he sort of helps Susie recognize and accept her own potential and her sheer hopeful spirit, likening her to the dragon in his own story. But again, this game is about art, and in what I can't help but believe is a metaphor for the artistic process. Gerson even tells her to keep doing the things she likes even though she sucks at it, because it might be hard now, but that's the only real way to improve, and that hits way too close to home. I also really love Gerson being the secret boss here because while he's not dark or creepy or evil or anything, thematically, it still makes complete sense. He doesn't really believe in prophecy, that everything is set in stone. He encompasses the spirit of freedom that's so inherent to these secret bosses so well, and it's something no one would have ever expected despite it clicking just right into place.
Gerson is able, more than anyone or anything else here, to represent this chapter's themes, this game's themes, and to tie them all together.
Gerson makes a ton of points about storytelling. I like this one part where he says, quote, "There's no better story than one told with sparkling eyes, that it's doubt and irony and predictability that poisons a story, which Susie, being Susie, has none of. But I think it's best demonstrated in this one scene after the secret boss fight, after Susie wins. Like I said, Gerson brings up his own story and its influence. Susie's all like, wasn't Dragon Blazers based on it? Dragon Blazers being this in-universe RPG that I really wish were real because it sounds cool as hell. And Gerson responds with what's honestly one of the most insightful and profound monologues about art that Deltarune's ever presented, that I've heard in any game, really. And so they changed parts of the story. Of course, the biggest fans got mad, but isn't it interesting? The book was already just an interpretation of something else. Stories can be retold. They can be changed. That's what I believe. It's a perfect encapsulation of what makes stories great, what makes Deltarune great. It is Undertale's parallel story, after all, but it's not just the same thing. It's different. It's new. In the same way that it's not Earthbound or Chrono Trigger or Homestuck again either.
And that's the exact thing Deltarune and all great stories specialize in. And sure, I love originality. I love brand spanking new plots and concepts. But those things, they can only flow, can only stem from the stories of old, made fresh from tropes, from pieces of old tales forged to make new ones. And that's not something that should be mocked or scorned. No, that should be celebrated. That is the power of stories retold. That is the lifeblood of all great works of art. And it's a power that it isn't easy to wield, isn't easy to master by any means, but it is the heart of where all great stories lie.
Creatives, artists, whatever you call them, they shouldn't be ashamed, nor should they be criticized for simply using a widespread trope found in other things. Because it's the execution that matters. It's what's done with that trope that really matters. Deltarune, Undertale, honestly most indie games, their creators are generally super transparent transparent about what games, what other pieces from other mediums influence their creations. Most of the time, it's apparent to those in the know just by playing the damn thing. And that's not a bad thing at all. Inspiration isn't the same as ripping something off, doing the same thing again with no variants. It's not in any way a disservice to what's come before. No, when done right, it's the purest way of keeping that original work spirit alive. Not just by emulating it in some ways, but also by perpetuating its legacy. I mean, I don't think games like Brandish or Off, or this thing I don't know how to pronounce, or even bigger ones like Chrono Trigger or Earthbound would be anywhere near as discussed as they still are in the modern day, if not for indie titles like Undertale and Deltarune paying homage to them, which is just beautiful to see.
I brought up earlier my failure to understand why so many games influenced by Undertale tried playing things so close to the hip. But now I understand that just saying my game's inspired by this other thing and putting that inspiration on full display, that's not ripping off that original thing at all. And I honestly think a lot of my original positions sort of came from insecurity.
I've always been sort of a perfectionist. Well, not sort of, it's really my whole thing. But the problem with me being a perfectionist kinda contradicts the fact that I suck donkey ass at everything I try, so that doesn't work out super well. I always want everything I make to be extremely creative and new and interesting and awesome. Like, oh god, who wants to have tropes or cliches? Those things are evil and unoriginal, which I see now is bullshit. They're just using those same concepts with a new twist, sometimes not even with a new twist. That's not unoriginal, that's straight up just how you tell a story. But even though I understand that now, it doesn't really stop me from being a walking sack of cognitive dissonance.
And the truth, the bitter truth, is that I have a lot of faith in myself, faith that I probably shouldn't have, but I know that somewhere inside I have what it takes to make something great. I know what makes things work. I know what makes a masterpiece. I know I can do it. I have the gift. I have the secret. I truly believe that I do, but I just don't know for certain that I can pull through, that I won't let my own self-imposed anxieties crush me first. And even still, I've dedicated my whole life to making this game until it's done, and I don't even know if it's worth it, if it'll all pay off, if I'm not just wasting what little time I have here to begin with, that this thing isn't gonna just die on arrival, or even worse, be a total hodgepodge disaster piece because of my own paranoia.
I mean, just look at, well, me for instance. I don't talk to people too often, and by too often, I mean ever. So when you randomly started visiting me out of the blue, well, what do? I copy my influences. Some being more obvious than others, but I do think that over time, over the past few weeks, I've at least kinda come a little more into my own. I've found my voice, and don't get me wrong, I'm not comparing your and my little nerdy conversations to actual art. I'm just saying that that's how these things go. And thinking a little deeper, am I gonna make the next big thing, the next beloved indie darling? No, I don't think so, at least. I don't know if really anyone's gonna like what I have to offer, and that used to really bother me, but it's something I've come to accept.
I think deep down, everyone wants that validation. They want the things they pour their bleeding hearts into to succeed and be loved, and I'm not gonna lie to you, I want that too, but the truth is that's just not why I do this anymore. Sure, maybe my game won't be a big success, maybe it won't make a difference, maybe it'll come and go and no one will give a piss about it, but that's fine, because I don't care anymore. I'm doing this for me, to prove that I can, to prove that my life and my story matters, that it can matter, that it can mean something. Virality, popularity, awards, money, those things don't matter to me as much anymore. I mean, it's gonna be free anyway, so money doesn't even matter to begin with. All that matters is I just want to make something I can be proud of for once, and those things really aren't the same. I've seen 1,000 great games die in complete obscurity, and I'll see it happen to 1,000 more, and as for myself, I'm alright with that. I've never made anything work. I've never been happy. I've always felt like my failure was predestined, predetermined, but as long as I can escape that, as long as I can pave my own way, as long as I can finally be proud of myself, not hate myself, I'll be happy. And after all this time, after all this stress and all this struggle, it feels really corny to say to another person, I'll admit that, but it's true. For the first time in my life, I too have hope crossed on my heart, hope that I can make my own way, that I can defy my own fate, my own preordained failure, because I have to, because I don't have another choice. This is all I do have. I go to work, I come home, work on my game for a few hours, pass out for a couple hours. That's all I have, and that's all I do, that's all I am. And that sounds a little sad. It is a little sad, but I don't have a life. This is the one thing I do that provides me with that small sense of fulfillment others strive on. Making art, making my own worlds, my own stories. That's the only thing that gives me that rapidly waning courage it takes to get out of bed every day. It's the very source of my passion. It's what raises my heart rate. It's all I have, and it's all I am. And the thought that it could fail, the risk of all this time I put into it in the supposed best years of my life, it petrifies me. It's what keeps me up at night, day, whenever I sleep. It's what fills me with anxiety with every passing moment of the day. And I'd always get so depressed when I'd see something new and great and creative come along, because I always knew I could never live up to it. I could never make something as great as this thing, and Deltarune was always a great example of that. It was my initial inspiration for a lot of the stuff I'm aiming for, after all.
Especially something like Chapter 4, which felt like this incredible unleashing of something that's been built up for so long, a very warranted flaunting of sheer talent and creative passion. And that's something that really stuck with me, because I think the main guy behind the game's development sorta knew that. Because I'll be real with you, what he did took balls. You spend over a decade curating this story, meticulously crafting it into this perfect narrative, and slowly easing people into this world you constructed, which started with, by the way, something that became a massive pop culture phenomenon, something that changed lives, something with the widespread reputation of being one of the greatest games of all time. And you only go on to make something that is, in a lot of departments, even better afterwards. Something you've sunk, again, over a decade into, and it surpasses everyone's already astronomical expectations. And thinking about myself, there have been just so many times I look at that. I look at something like Deltarune, for example, and I think, God, there's just no way I could make something that ever lived up to the games that I love, to the very things so fundamental to making me who I am. And it's like, yeah, I probably can't. But that's why the whole artistic premise of Deltarune appeals to me so much. Again, specifically in Chapter 4, I've brought it up a couple of times before, but the piano is such a strong thematic element to this chapter, and the game as a whole. You see, whenever Chris did get the chance to play a piano prior to this point, they'd play a very specific song, one titled Concert for You. It is 3 seconds long, and it goes a little something like this. That's it. The only time they ever feel comfortable playing the piano at all, aside from when Susie and Rousey encourage them to, is this small, brief window of time where not only are they free from our control, but when they're under the impression that we have no chance of hearing them play. Why exactly is that? I don't know. Like, it's definitely a thing. It's not that they can't play because of us, as well, they absolutely can. They simply choose not to. So who knows, it might just be a, grr, you possess me and make me do weird stuff I don't want to do, so fuck you. You don't get to hear me play out of spite. And I totally could be wrong here, but that's not really how I read this. It's not like we truly make Chris do things they don't want to do. If they want to resist our control, they can and occasionally do. Even regarding the weird route, we know now Chris would never do what we compel them to. They even try to undo it all against our will. They hate us for instigating it in the first place, but we also know now that in some perverted way, they enjoy it and take solace in the fact that they don't have to take full responsibility for their actions because of our influence. Chris's relationship with the piano is something that I just struggle to find the right words for, but it's handled in such a personal feeling way, a way that feels like an insight to the very creative process behind Deltarune. Making art, letting it out into the world, it's a deeply personal process, one that truly takes a lot of deep digging to do. Maybe it is a Chris struggling for control thing, I don't know, but looking at that scene in Chapter 4, looking at Chris's sprite animation, it's a clear personification of the passion that goes into making art, the very passion that goes into making something like Deltarune, which, from a lore perspective, it's a process I don't think Chris can do, at least do naturally, easily, because of us. But in a more artistic sense, I also think Chris's hesitance regarding their musical prowess kind of reflects Susie's desire to be better at healing magic, which is something I found a lot of relatability in. Not the healing magic part, the being better at a thing part. I'm not an astrologist or whatever they call themselves. Throughout the chapter, she tries her hand at healing magic, but it's just not something she's great at yet, culminating in what's honestly one of my favorite scenes in the game, kind of a sleeper. Like, it doesn't just foreshadow the final boss against the Titan, which is something the whole of the Jackenstein boss kinda did, but like, story-wise, Gerson urges her to practice at it, but she's held back by this fear of not being good enough, of embarrassing herself, and what's the point of trying? I mean, after all, she'll never be as good as Ralsei, so why even try? But she grows beyond that, becoming a great healer in her own right, and considering Gerson's whole character revolving around writing and storytelling and freedom to subvert things seemingly inscribed solid in stone, I don't think there's any way that's unintentional. Sure, there's always going to be someone or something better than me, better than you, better than the things we make and do, but that doesn't really matter, because there's no other way to get better than to practice, to study the old masters and hone your craft, and that's sort of what Gerson's all about. He's just so cool, man. I don't know who said it originally, but I heard some guy who follows me on Twitter say once, comparison is the thief of joy, and comparison may as well be my middle name. And so I've always strived to create this super original thing no one's ever thought of before with no influence from anything else whatsoever, but that's just not doable. Not because I'm not a creative person, I am one, I think, but because the games, the stories, the works of art that made me who I am now, I can't separate myself from. Games like Deltarune and One Shot and Amori, the other great indie darlings, games like Breath of the Wild and Mario Galaxy and The Last of Us, movies like Birdman and Star Wars and Goodfellas upon dozens and dozens of other ones. They're a part of me. And you know, I've always said Super Paper Mario is my favorite game, and the main reason for that is the fact that it sort of encompasses everything I want to see in a game to some extent, and Deltarune sort of fills that role now. It has for a while, but especially with these new chapters, it covers so much ground of everything I want to see a game do. Like, the only thing keeping me from saying that this is my favorite game ever made is the fact it's not finished yet, and inevitably, the fruits of my labor are going to reflect that. Games like Deltarune, like I said, they include all the things I want in a game, and I make games I want to actually play, so of course there'll be some similarities, that's natural, and not only am I okay with that, I happily welcome that with open arms. I accept that because that's what art is supposed to do. That's what stories are supposed to be.
It's funny because I always used to be really afraid of dying early, whatever that means, because that would mean all my time was wasted and my game I spent all this time on never got to see the light of day, but I'll be honest with you, now I think I'd be okay with that. It's that whole infinite monkeys, infinite time writing Shakespeare thing. If by some freak accident occurrence my game never comes out and I die early, then, well, someone else will come along and they'll make exactly what I'm dying to make. They'll tell the story that I'm dying to tell. And again, it's not like I have anything else to live for. I sort of see myself as expendable, as interchangeable. And I know someone else will live my dreams. Someone else will fulfill my vision, but all I naively hope is that person can be me. But who knows how all of that will unfold. But in the meantime, whenever you come over and I talk to you about big-time indie games like this, I like to give a little spotlight to the smaller indie titles that don't get as much attention. Like when we talked about One Shot that one time, and I brought up Night Margin's next game, Margin of the Strange. Well, as it turns out, that game's pixel environment artist, Nier, is working on a title of their own in RPG Maker, titled Skyless Blind, and it looks absolutely phenomenal.
The artwork, gorgeous. Everything is so gripping and enticing to look at. The premise and lore, intriguing. I can't wait to see how this all goes. It takes a lot of clear inspiration in its exploration from stuff like Yume Nikki in the sense that it's all about surrealist exploration, but this time in a cosmic horror sort of setting. And I know you, like me, are super into games like that, like Amori, like One Shot and Undertale, so I think you should absolutely give Skyless Blind a heavy gawk. It's got a couple of weeks left on its Kickstarter campaign and has nearly halfway reached its funding goal, and this is something I really hope makes it. And not to mention there's a playable beta out there right now, and it's definitely worth trying out. Just by playing through this beta and looking at what little we have of the game so far, I can truly tell that Skyless Blind is gonna be something really special someday.
Yeah, all that being said, I haven't gotten a good night's sleep in like a month or two, and I have no idea what any of this has to do with Deltarune, so I'm just gonna wrap it up. Alright, so story's good, tropes good, Deltarune good, sleep deprivation bad.